Hi there and welcome back everyone. This is Jennifer McGuire. So today I'm sharing more fun techniques that you can do with Perfect Pearl pigment powder. Now perfect pearls have been around for ages, so many of us crafters who've been doing this for a long time have them in our stash. And the nice thing about this product is it's inexpensive, so if you don't have them, you can check them out. Now, perfect pearls are very unique because they provide a beautiful shimmer and can be used wet or dry. Today, I'm showing a few different dry techniques to get beautiful shine on your cards. I've done many perfect pearl videos in the past, but today's ideas are new. But here in the top right, I will link to a playlist of some other perfect pearl videos that I've done. Now, if you're not familiar with perfect pearls, they are pigment powders that are made up of fine granules of mica. They have a built-in resin and binder, and therefore you can use them wet or dry. But as I mentioned, I'll be doing dry techniques today. They give a beautiful pearlescent shimmery effect that is really fun to add to your cards. Before we get started, I did want to apologize. I had set up my camera wrong for part of the filming in this video, so you'll see my lighting is a little wonky. I apologize, but still wanted to share the ideas with you. Okay, so let's get started with this first example where I do a lift and add technique with perfect pearls, and this creates a two-tone color with lots of shimmer. I'm starting with a dark cardstock, in this case navy, and I'm generously applying Versamark ink over the entire surface. Now Versamark ink is a clear, sticky ink, so it will grab and hold the perfect pearls that we'll add in a moment. Now you can also get a ink pad that Ranger sells that is meant to be used with the perfect pearls, but I find the Versamark ink works just as well, and most of us have it in our stash. So here I have a little jar of perfect pearls. They all come in a jar this size, and I'm generously applying perfect pearls to this entire surface. Normally I do not use this amount of pearl, but when you're doing a whole background, you want to make sure that you have it on nice and even. So this I find to be the best way. I do then put all of the extra powder, I brush it off and put it into the jar again using a little coffee filter. A little goes a long way, and these jars will last you a very long time. Now Ranger sells brushes, the ones that you see me using today, and they're perfect for this technique because they're nice and soft. However, you could use any brush that's dry that you may have. Okay, so next I'm going to do some stamping. I'm using this Simon Says Stamp and Gina K Designs stamp set called Joy of the Season. This is exclusive for Stamptember and can only be found at Simon Says Stamp. This is a large 6x8 set with beautiful images that are perfect for this technique. So I encourage you to take a closer look at this set because I think it's a great one for the holiday season. So I'm going to use the trees for this first example. I'm taking my paper that's covered with the perfect pearls and putting it into my MISTI stamping tool. You can use an acrylic block if you prefer. I'm inking up my clean stamp with Versamark ink and stamping it onto the perfect pearl surface. This will actually remove the perfect pearl, and look how beautiful that is. Well, I don't want the rest of that to go to waste on my stamp, so I'm taking another piece of navy cardstock and I'll make a second card. I'm just going to stamp this on here. You won't see much shine because there's not much on the stamp, but I'll have a sticky image here that we can use for another perfect pearl technique. So I wanted to repeat that process so I could remove more or lift more of that excess perfect pearl on our project. So I'm putting that back into the MISTI. I'm going to clean my stamp well so it's perfectly clean. Then I will ink it up again with Versamark ink and stamp again. You don't have to repeat this process, but you'll see that you get a more crisp image by doing it a second time. And I'm going to take that second piece and stamp it again in the exact same place, just to not waste it. Okay, so now that I have these pieces ready, I'm going to take the one where we lifted the perfect pearl and replace it with a new color. This time I'm using Forever Blue Perfect Pearls. The pearls come in many beautiful colors. And so now we will have kind of that silvery look around in the sky, and our trees will have this darker blue shine to it. I did apply some of this blue perfect pearl over the entire surface because I wanted to leave some of that blue behind, so I'd have like silver and blue looking sky in the background where it's not perfectly even. I'll go ahead and brush all that excess in. And then you can take a dry cloth and wipe over this to remove any excess that you may want. And check out that beautiful shimmer. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of questions about this. I do use a fixative spray when I'm doing this amount of perfect pearl. I have put a ton down on this card because I covered the entire surface. So to be safe, I'm just going to go outside, spray it with a fixative just to protect the surface. You could skip this and just wave your paper through a light mist of water, and the water will bind the perfect pearl to the paper. However, I really want to protect it, so I'm just going to be safe and use a fixative, and I do that with most of my cards where I just want to be sure that it's okay. I will then trim this piece down and mat it with a piece of navy cardstock. I wanted to add little snowflakes in the background, so I'm using my white paint pen with a very fine tip to add little dots. I'm finding a lot of luck with this paint pen because it really goes on very opaque and is great for projects like this. I then use the Birch Press Big Joy Sugar Script dies to create the Joy die cut. So I did the shadow die cut with navy cardstock and the word Joy with white. I also used the Simon Says Stamp Big Thanks stamp set to stamp a little sentiment strip to glue across the word Joy. I'm using my Gina Connect adhesive to add that all to my project, and I'll use my T-ruler to make sure that it's straight. I like to use liquid adhesive with my die cuts because then I can wiggle them around till I'm happy with where they need to be and let them dry. So here you can see all of that shine in the background. This technique does work best on dark cardstocks, but you can try light if you prefer. You can also see the little white snowflakes falling and the sentiment to finish it off. So in this case, we lifted some perfect pearl, then added a different color of perfect pearl back in. So remember that other piece where we stamped off that excess ink when we were doing the lift technique? Well, let's put that to use and create a card. So you can see that image there a little bit dark on that cardstock. I'm taking my perfect pearls in my brush and brushing it on. You can see I'm using very little perfect pearl, and that's all you need to go over a stamped image. The Versamark ink that we stamped on this cardstock is holding the perfect pearls in place. I can then use the brush to brush off the excess, and then I can trim this piece down. By the way, that perfect pearl color that I just used is the perfect pearl color of perfect pearls. It's kind of confusing, but that's the one that I use in most of my videos. I trimmed this piece down and matted it with a piece of silver cardstock, and then added it to a 5" by 5" white note card. The sentiment is from the Birch Press Big Piece Sugar Script dies, that's a mouthful, and I added that to the center, along with a sentiment strip that says Sleep in Heavenly, and that is from this Joy and Peace stamp set, which I'll use again later in this video. So you can see there's lots of shimmer on those trees, and I also added tiny white dots again and some navy marker dots, just for some interest in the background. In this case, the only shimmers on the trees themselves. So this is a very basic way to use the perfect pearls, but it was a great way to use the excess ink that we lifted off from our first technique. And I did spray this with a fixative, or you can use a mist of water. Okay, my next technique shows a little variation of this. In this case, I'm using the Tim Holtz Nature's Wonder stamp set. This has beautiful leaves in it that have lots of detail. It's a cling set, but you could use clear for this if you prefer, but I love these designs. So I took a bunch of these leaves and I positioned them on a piece of green cardstock in my MISTI stamping tool so that they be positioned perfectly on that card. I will trim this piece down. Okay, so now I can cover this cardstock with perfect pearl as we did before. I'm taking my Versamark ink pad, pressing it generously over the entire surface, and then we can brush on our perfect pearl. In this case, I'm using a gold color, and this will give a beautiful gold shine over the navy cardstock. You could use any color of cardstock here, but I do find that a darker color is most effective, but try what you'd like. Okay, so once I have this covered with a good amount of perfect pearl, I'll put it into my stamping tool, and I will ink up my stamps with Versamark ink, Stamp it onto the perfect pearl surface, lifting the perfect pearl away wherever I stamped. Again, I'll take another piece and just stamp off that excess that's on our stamp before I clean it and repeat the process. You don't have to repeat the process as I mentioned. However, I find it gives a more detailed result to lift more of that excess perfect pearl, and there you can see the result. Again, I'll stamp the excess off onto that extra piece. Now this time I'm going to start with that extra piece first, and we'll do this leaf background that you see here. In this case, I'm just applying perfect pearl to those leaves where we have the stamped Versamark images. But this time I'm applying a few different colors. In addition to the gold, I'm using perfect copper, forever red, perfect bronze, and I'm kind of putting them in different areas over the background. You can see a little goes a long way. I did use a little bit much there, so I will brush all this excess into a coffee filter, and I can save that little mix for another project if I want. I'm using my perfect pearl brush to brush off the excess, but I like to use a Swiffer dusting cloth to really clean it up. I just wipe it gently over the surface. The dusting cloth is also helpful for cleaning up your workspace. And there you can see the different colors of shine in the background. So pretty. And here is the other piece where I just lifted the pearl away. I'm going to leave that one as is so I could have the green detailed leaves against that gold background. On the piece there to the right, I am going to add some stamping over it just for a little more interest. I'm using one of my favorite background stamps. This is the Simon Says Stamp You Matter stamp. I'm going to ink this with a soft olive ink, which happens to match that cardstock that we're stamping on. I'm stamping this over the perfect pearls, and this just gives a fun layered look. The dye ink actually doesn't really stamp onto the perfect pearls much, so our leaves are still beautifully shiny and intact. And I will spray both of these surfaces with the fixative. Now, if you wanted to, the one on the right, you could just put a mist of water, but I like to be safe. So I did simple card designs for both of these cards. It's the same design. I trimmed them down and added them to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note cards. I added a friend die cut and a You Are Golden sentiment strip. So here is the other card. You can see the shimmery leaves with the text in the background. And you can see both cards give very detailed results with the perfect pearls. By the way, here are the products I use for the sentiment. I use the Birch Press Big Friend Sugar Script dies. And the Simon Says Stamp Simply Sentiments 1 set, which I've used in almost every video lately. I think that You Are Golden sentiment goes great with the perfect pearl backgrounds. So with these two examples, we did a perfect pearl lift technique and also used multiple colors of pearls together on one card. Okay, my last card uses a few different techniques that I showed in this video together and also uses the product from my first cards in this video. In this case, I'm using the snowflakes from that Gina K. Simon Says Stamp Joy of the Season stamp set. And I'm just stamping the snowflakes repeatedly to cover a piece of navy cardstock. And I'm using Versamark ink. I'm then using perfect pearl to apply, and you'll see we end up with beautiful shimmery snowflakes against the navy background. I use my Swiffer dusting cloth to remove the excess. If you don't have Swiffer dusting cloths, you can just use a dry cloth instead. Okay, so now I want to do more on this. So I'm stamping that You Matter background stamp with Versamark ink. Make sure your stamp's clean. I'm stamping that right on top of the other. And you'll see it went crooked because I didn't use a magnet, but that's okay. I'll fix it in a moment. This time I'm applying the Forever Violet Perfect Pearls. So these pearls will stick to the text. So I can remove the excess, and there we have a two-tone layered background. This is fun because when you tilt it in different ways, you see different things because of how the perfect pearls look. This one I just did a quick mist of some water. I just kind of spray the water in the air and wave my paper through it, so it's just a light mist of water, and that helps it to stick. But again, you could use a fixative if you prefer. Now remember how I accidentally stamped that crooked? I'm going to fix it here. So I'm making sure that the top edge lines up with the stamping in the background, the text stamping. Once I know that that is squared, I can go ahead and cut the other sides by lining that top edge with the top of my trimmer and then cutting off the excess. So I end up there with a nice rectangle piece with the text straight. For the focal point of my card, I created an accent using the Birch Press Radiant Ornament dies. This is a set of dies that's meant to layer, but you could use them separately if you wanted to. I die cut each die from white cardstock and glued them together for a stacked look. If you've never used layered dies before, I'll link to a video here with lots of ideas on how to use them. In this case, I just did a white on white look. I also added a silver string to the top. I'm using liquid adhesive to adhere the ornament to the top center of my card panel. I'll flip this over and I'll use a piece of double-sided tape to hold the silver strings on the back. So you could use Scotch tape, anything that you want here. You just want to be sure those don't come undone. I'll then use liquid adhesive to glue this piece onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. And by the way, people ask if you get buckling with the paper when you're using a liquid adhesive. With Gina K Connect, I find I don't get any buckling because I don't need to use much of the adhesive to make sure it stays put. I again used the Birch Press Sugar Script dies for the word peace, and I used the And Wonder from the same Birch Press stamp set that I used earlier. So you can see the two-tone shimmer in the background really creates a fun backdrop for a simple card. So there you have some more ways to use Perfect Pearl pigment powder creatively on your cards. I hope you'll give these a try along with the other ideas from my other videos. I link all of these products below in the description so you can find them easily if you're interested. You can also go to my blog for more information and photos. If you haven't done so, hit that subscribe button so you know when I put out new videos so you can check those out. I appreciate all the time that you spend here watching these videos, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.